Hi, who's that? Saurabh?
Gaurav, yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you let me know when it's ready to go.
Yeah, right on. A very good evening to all of you. Thank you all for logging in on time today. It's my pleasure in welcoming you all for the series on how to be investment ready by TiE Chennai and Kiratsu Ford. We'll be having 6 sessions in this series, and today's session is going to be on Are You Startup Ready? So the format for today's session is going to be an hour of presentation followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. During Q&A, feel free to raise your hands for any questions. We'll be able to unmute you. So with this, let me introduce the speaker for today's session and the entire series, Mr. Subramaniam Iyer, alias Subra. Mr. Subra is a forensic accountant, independent director, angel investor, strategy consultant, focusing on business models, and an expert witness with over 30 years of work experience in Asia and Australia, and transaction experience in Asia and the US and Europe. Mr. Subra is the co-president of Kiratsu Forum Singapore and Chennai. Kiratsu Forum is the largest angel network in the world with 53 chapters and over 3,000 accredited investors in the entrepreneur space. Over the last decade, Mr. Subra has played a missionary role in guiding and assisting CEOs of small companies in South India and Southeast Asia through critical growth stages in India and more broadly Asia through his other venture. Mr. Subra worked on understanding and addressing the severe shortage of resources in the small business sector, from financial capital to experience capital, relationship, and infrastructure capital. He was a partner with the PricewaterhouseCoopers, Singapore. In over 21 years with PwC, he's been an auditor, which included over 2 years with its office in Melbourne, Australia, a transaction partner he started. And then he headed the transaction group in PwC Singapore and the partner heading up the financial restructuring and forensic accounting services unit. In the former, he focused on commercial, financial, and tax due diligence. And in the time with PwC, he would have led over 100 engagements of various sizes, including many that were cross-border. Mr. Subra qualified with a bachelor's in accountancy from National University of Singapore and thereafter with the Institute of Chartered Accountant in Australia. He completed the general management program at Harvard Business School in the fall of 2007 and is an alumnus of that school. So on behalf of TiE Chennai and the participants here, I welcome you, sir, and invite you to take over the session.
Thanks, Saurabh. I hope I am clear. I thought I'll just have the video on for a bit so that people know what I look like. Although, you know, given that all of us work from home, you know, we don't even bother to, you know, I'm happy with the t-shirt on, right? So I will get off video so that, you know, you guys don't have a video that distracts the slides now that you know what I look like. And I suspect some of the participants may have met me at some point in time. It's just like I have been stuck in Singapore, unable to return to Chennai because of COVID. So I am doing this long distance, but Zoom seems to work just as well. Okay, let me get to the slides. Just quick. Kapil, next slide. Okay, as Saurabh was saying, we have 6 sessions on this series. We are going to start today with Are You Startup Ready? The next session is on stages of funding and investor expectations. And we have 2 sessions on fundraising. I've sort of broken it up into business models and business plans at the first session, and the second session on planning and executing the fundraise. The 5th session on getting ready for due diligence, and the final session on valuations and transactions document. So with that, next slide, Kapil. Okay, are you startup ready? The next slide. Yeah, Kapil, can you play the Bill Gross video?
I used to think that the idea was everything. I mean, I named my company Idea Lab and how much I worship the aha moment.
Kapil, if you can start from the beginning.
I'm really excited to share with you some findings that really surprised me about what makes companies succeed the most, what factors actually matter the most for startup success. I believe that the startup organization is one of the greatest forms to make the world a better place. If you take a group of people with the right equity incentives and organize them in a startup, you can unlock human potential in a way never before possible. You get them to achieve unbelievable things. But if the startup organization is so great, why do so many fail? That's what I wanted to find out. I wanted to find out what actually matters most for startup success. And I wanted to try to be systematic about it, avoid some of my instincts and maybe misperceptions I have from so many companies I've seen over the years. I wanted to know this because I've been starting businesses since I was 12 years old, when I sold candy at the bus stop in junior high school, to high school when I made solar energy devices, to college when I made loudspeakers, and when I graduated from college, started software companies. And 20 years ago, I started Idea Lab, and in the last 20 years, we started more than 100 companies, many successes and many big failures. We learned a lot from those failures. So I tried to look across what factors accounted the most for company success and failure. So I looked at these 5. First, the idea. I used to think that the idea was everything. I mean, I named my company Idea Lab and how much I worship the aha moment when you first come up with the idea. But then over time, I came to think that maybe the team, the execution, adaptability, that mattered even more than the idea. I never thought I'd be quoting boxer Mike Tyson on the TED stage, but he once said, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face." And I think that's so true about business as well. So much about a team's execution is its ability to adapt to getting punched in the face by the customer. The customer is the true reality. And that's why I came to think that the team maybe was the most important thing. Then I started looking at the business model. Does the company have a very clear path generating customer revenues? That started rising to the top in my thinking about maybe what mattered most for success. Then I looked at the funding. Sometimes companies received intense amount of funding. Maybe that's the most important thing. And then, of course, the timing. Is the idea way too early and the world's not ready for it? Is it early, meaning you're in advance and you have to educate the world? Is it just right, or is it too late and there's already too many competitors? So I tried to look very carefully at these 5 factors across many companies. And I looked across all 100 Idea Lab companies and 100 non-Idea Lab companies to try and come up with something scientific about it. So first, on these Idea Lab companies, the top 5 companies, CitySearch, Cars Direct, GoTo, NetZero, Tickets.com, those all became billion-dollar successes. And the 5 companies on the bottom, Z.com, Insider Pages, My Life, Desktop Factory, People Inc., we all had high hopes for, but didn't succeed. So I tried to rank across all of those attributes how I felt those companies scored on each of those dimensions. And then for non-Idea Lab companies, I looked at wild successes like Airbnb and Instagram and Uber and YouTube and LinkedIn, and some failures. Webvan, Cosmo, Pets.com, Flues, and Friendster. The bottom companies had intense funding. They even had business models in some cases, but they didn't succeed. I tried to look at what factors actually accounted the most for success and failure across all these companies, and the results really surprised me. The number one thing was timing. Timing accounted for 42% of the difference between success and failure. Team and execution came in second, and the idea, the differentiability of the idea, the unique idea, that actually came in third. Now, this isn't absolutely definitive. It's not to say that the idea isn't important. But it very much surprised me that the idea wasn't the most important thing. Sometimes it mattered more when it was actually timed. The last 2, business model and funding, made sense to me, actually. I think business model makes sense to be that low because you could start out without a business model and then add one later if your customers are demanding what you're creating. And funding, I think as well. If you're underfunded at first, but you're gaining traction, especially in today's age, it's very, very easy to get intense funding. So now let me give you some specific examples about each of these. So take a wild success like Airbnb that everybody knows about. Well, that company was famously passed on by many smart investors because people thought, no one's going to rent out a space in their home to a stranger. Of course, people proved that wrong. But one of the reasons it succeeded, aside from a good business model, a good idea, great execution, is the timing. That company came out right during the height of the recession when people really needed extra money. And that maybe helped people overcome their objection to renting out their own home to a stranger. Same thing with Uber. Uber came out, incredible company, incredible business model, great execution too, but the timing was so perfect for their need to get drivers into the system. Drivers were looking for extra money. It was very, very important. Some of our early successes, CitySearch came out when people needed web pages. GoTo.com, which we announced actually at TED in 1998, was when companies were looking for cost-effective ways to get traffic. We thought the idea was so great, but actually the timing was probably maybe more important. And then some of our failures. We started a company called Z.com. It was an online entertainment company. We were so excited about it. We raised enough money. We had a great business model. We'd even signed incredibly great Hollywood talent to join the company. But broadband penetration was too low in 1999, 2000. It was too hard to watch video content online. You had to put codecs in your browser and do all this stuff. And the company eventually went out of business in 2003. Just 2 years later, when the codec problem was solved by Adobe Flash, and when broadband penetration crossed 50% in America, YouTube was perfectly timed. Great idea, but unbelievable timing. And in fact, YouTube didn't even have a business model when it first started. It wasn't even it was certain that that would work out. But that was beautifully, beautifully timed. So what I would say in summary is execution definitely matters a lot. The idea matters a lot, but timing might matter even more. And the best way to really assess timing is to really look whether consumers are really ready for what you have to offer them. And to be really, really honest about it, not be in denial about any results that you see. Because if you have something you love, you want to push it forward. But you have to be very, very honest about that factor on timing. As I said earlier, I think startups can change the world and make the world a better place. I hope some of these insights can maybe help you have a slightly higher success ratio and thus make something great come to the world that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Thank you very much. Been a great audience.
Okay, back to the slides, Kapil.
Public speaking. That if the audience is sleeping, someone has to.
Yeah, okay, it's off now, Kapil. Yeah. Okay, I like to play this video because it's a good reality check for all of us who are involved in startups. So this is not to say business model is not important. I mean, I spend a lot of time with TiE, teaching people on business models. It's not that the team is not important, none of that. But it's just that research shows that if you don't time your startup properly, then the chances of success is very small, right? Which is why he's got 46% of success depends on timing, and sometimes timing is everything, right? So so that's the reason for the link. The second link is to a website called Seed Stars. No, don't bother, Kapil. Don't go there. I have told TiE to distribute to y'all one of the documents from there that I have downloaded. In fact, my whole talk is based on that particular document. So if you go to the Seed Stars website, it has got all kinds of guides for startups. So I have downloaded a document called Investment Readiness Checklist. I've already sent it to TiE, and I think they would share it with you at the end of this session. So there are 18 points that is there in that document. And the 18 points that I would talk about is therefore the same 18 points in that checklist. So you actually have a choice. You can stop listening to me and decide to just read that document, or you can listen to me. And the one additional thing that I will do is tell you some of the Keiretsu stories that we have had over the last 5-6 years, and how some of the points that's raised in this document has been brought to life in our experience. So with that, Kapil, the next slide. Okay. So the first question when you have a startup, is your founding team of the right size, right? The reason this question comes up is because some investors look at single team, a single member founding team with some concern. That's not to say that a solo operation doesn't work. It does often, even when you have a founding team, you have one person who is the live wire of that team. But some people have these concerns. So, the recommended is always 2 to 3 people, even if one person is dominant. They like the idea of a few founders. And when it comes to technology companies, even if the founder is somebody else, we always look at, whether the CTO has got some equity stake and skin in the game. Because, if you don't have the right CTO and you're always changing and hiring somebody else, it often doesn't work. And especially when it's a technology play. So, the size of the founding team, while it's not a gospel in the sense that, you need more than one person, but there is a bias when people look at the team and sort of say, if it's one person, can I rely on that person? The second thing about founding teams, I have also come across angel investors who have a complete no-no to a husband and wife founding team. I hear less of those complaints in India, but with Western investors, it's a big thing. I don't know whether it's just a reaction to the divorce rates in the West vis-a-vis, the divorce rates in India, although that's rising. But people are just concerned about too close a relationship amongst the founders, right? So, it's not just the founding team, but it's also sometimes the composition of the founding team which becomes important. The second question about the founding team is, are they complementary? And what do we mean by that, right? So we're always looking for someone who is the extrovert go-getter, because you need someone to do the rah-rah, the sales, speak confidently to investors, potential investors, and really sell the proposition. Then you need someone maybe who is a little bit quiet, looking after technology or finance or operations, because you can't have everybody competing for the same position. So the idea is, do we have all the skills associated with it, right? So many of our investments tends to be deep tech. So while we often want the CEO who is able to talk, we are often looking for his technology number 2 who can really deliver on the technology. And if you take technology further and you go into health tech, often we have comments along the lines that how come there is not a doctor in the team, right? Because people want to know whether the founding team actually have all the skill sets to be able to pull through the investments. The third question may seem strange, are you working on your emotional intelligence? I have to say, with some of our earlier investments in Kiritsu, we never looked at this as hard as we should perhaps had. And we had a company where two founding teams, two members in the founding team. One was as I said, the guy who would go out, get the business, talk to potential investors, sell the company. And the other person was responsible for the technology development of the product. And this was one of our early investments. It was actually a IIT linked investment. We have many, so you won't be able to guess. And what happened was the founding team split, in the sense that the two founders couldn't get along with each other after some time and weren't even talking to each other. So you can imagine, as angel investors, that really put our investment in that company at risk. And we had put certainly more than a crore as a group into that business. Fortunately, what happened was some of our investors were also mentors. And even though the whole problem, before the problem, as they say, the shit hit the fan, a few of our members were able to intervene and sort out the issues between the two founders. And the reality was one of them had to leave because it was so tricky that it had to happen. And the problem is, it's not like a one-off occurrence. We've had another company with 3 founders, and there the technology partner, the founder who initially brought in the technology was evicted. And we had all kinds of issues about who owned the IP, how about developing the product. And what happened was, and it was by that time, they already had institutional investment. And therefore, the institutional investors actually forced the remaining 2 members to re-engineer the product and improve the product before they allowed them to go and market the product again. Now they are back on the scene, and they're looking to grow. And this group is now talking to me about expanding their product to Southeast Asia. I mean, it may take some time given the COVID times, but at least they've sort of recovered from the fallout, between and among the founding team members to sort of survive to fight again. So next slide, Kapil. Okay, no, just go back. We also talk about advisors. So sometimes you find that you can't have too many members in the founding team, and therefore you may look to advisors for the complementary skills. So as I said, sometimes in healthcare, you need doctors. I was just evaluating a company out of the US, which is in a very unique position on how to deal with viruses. So in the day of COVID, they have a treatment method which is very different. So they're not in the vaccine space. They have a product, or it could be a group of pharmaceutical products that kills the membrane of viruses. So it's a very different thing. And because some of their people cannot work full time, for example, some of the doctors with the research background. So there was a lady who is actually a professor at Stanford and does research through her position in Stanford University, is part of the team, but she's not a full-time employee, right? And it sometimes works brilliantly because she gets research grants, which the company by itself will never get. So when you look at the founding team, it's not just the full-time members of the team. Sometimes you look for complements in the advisors that you pull together. Okay, next slide, Kapil. Okay, the second question is about the products and the market. I think one of the most important questions, does the market really, really need what you're trying to say? It's not a question of what you have. You might think that the market needs it, but it is so important to be able to prove yourself, pinch yourself, and sort of say the market really needs it, right? So, some of the things that you may need to do, you have to talk to potential customers, I worry about this a little bit in India because, a common response is, oh, Paklam, we can see, right? But that doesn't mean that they actually want it, Sometimes people don't want to be confrontational, right? Like as Westerners often are, right? And therefore, if anything is possible, we can see, let's see, right? But that doesn't actually give you the kind of feedback that you need to be sure that there are really potential customers, right? So you have to be, you really need your ears to the ground when you listen to customers before, being sure that, the market's ready for it. And then you look at your product and look at what are some of your biggest competitors doing, right? because it gives you a clue. If sometimes, very often, people come to us and say, oh, we don't have competition because nobody is doing it. That's also a bit scary. If nobody is doing it, is it because they don't know how to do it, or they have tried it and they think that there's really no market there, right? So it's important that you actually spend the time to understand what your customers really need, right? So in one of the later sessions, we will talk, I will talk briefly today about product market fit, but I would talk a little bit more when I talk about fundraising, about the importance of making sure that you not only have a product market fit, but also a business model fit, because without which you really cannot make a successful business. So the second thing on products and market is your positioning. And your positioning vis-a-vis your competitors, basically, right? So in your positioning, some of the questions to ask, right? Are you just better at marketing and communications? Or is the performance of your product better? Is it much cheaper? Or is it niche, right? And therefore the competitive market space is actually not working on it, right? Now, I have quite a bit of understanding of the electric vehicle space, right? And there have been quite a few companies that have come up in India in the EV space. And one of the challenges that electric vehicles encounter is the fact that their initial cost is a lot more expensive because battery cost is expensive. But if you operate the vehicle over a period of 3 years, almost invariably, right, the electric vehicle would be superior to your diesel vehicle, right? And the reason is because the running cost is a fraction of diesel costs. But the thing is, with a diesel engine, your upfront cost is less and your diesel cost is spread out over 3 years, right? I'm making a 3-year comparison, right? So when you sort of positioning an electric vehicle like that, your positioning is not just your competitors, is not just other electric vehicles, but your competitors is also the diesel vehicle, right? And the struggle is, how do you position it? Do you price it a lot lower, in which case your profits are going to be much less? Do you price it at the right level and try and sell the proposition that over 3 years, the cost to the customer will be okay? Now, you really need to know what your market is prepared to accept. And this can be a little challenging, right? So it's very important that you do it. So who's going to win in this space? And we have a thesis that the guy who's going to win is the person who can spend enough money on R&D to bring the cost of the electric vehicle as close to that of a diesel vehicle as quickly as possible, right? Because then your opening price narrows and the usage cost is much cheaper, right? That becomes a proposition that is a lot more easier to sell. So when you're looking at positioning and competitors, you're not looking at just your product, but you're also looking at adjacent products, right? So if you take an electric vehicle, existing petrol and diesel vehicles are your alternatives, right? So you need to look at that positioning. The next thing when it comes to product and barriers is the barrier to entry. Almost any question that a potential angel investor will ask you is, what is your differentiation, right? How easy is it to somebody to copy you? How easy is it for somebody to re-engineer your product? So all of this is an issue, right? So, and the answers to them are not necessarily all easy. So one of my larger investments, it's not a Keiretsu investment, it's one of my investments outside, is a company that's actually developed medical simulators to train orthopedic surgeons, right? So there are two aspects to it. One is the what we call the haptics, the touch and feel, which we buy from a Swiss company. And the second is all the coding that's gone into giving a 3D view of a knee replacement surgery, which is, and there is no patent associated with it. It's all in the coding, right? It's all in the algorithms that have been written to make that really real life, right? So doctors and surgeons have used it and they say it's next to nothing, right? So we always get this question, okay, so what is your IP protection? And we always say, look, you know, the codes are all secret, right? Some people buy it, some people don't buy it. But the question keeps repeating, right? So much so that when we went out, and we will talk a little bit more when we talk about fundraising strategies, is we actually ended up registering a particular patent, not setting out all of these codes, because then all my competitors will know what we do. But we sort of designed a specific patent. We then trademarked the name. So we created barriers to entries in other ways, including our affiliation with a highly regarded hospital in Southeast Asia. So sometimes the barriers to entry is not just the patents, or not just, it could be codes, it could be partnerships that you establish, as I'm talking about, you know, establishing a partnership, in this case was with National University Hospital of Singapore. Or codes, and if the codes are really complex, it's not easy to copy. You know, the company that I just talked about, which is creating a new way of treating viruses, they have lots and lots of patents, okay? Even if it's not in their name, it's in the name of the advisors who do the research, but all those patents are registered in the name of the company. So barriers to entry is not just about, you know, intellectual protection by way of patents. It could be protection by way of, the complexity of the codes, the partnerships that you establish, and all that sort of thing, right? But it is always a challenge trying to convince investors that you have sufficient intellectual property protection. The question does come up, and the question does come up very often. So if you're in the early stages, you know, one of the things that you need to think about as you develop your product is the barriers to entry, the differentiation, and how easy is it to for someone else to copy. I mean, one of the biggest questions is, can a rich company, right, take one of the technology majors, how hard is it for them to just copy and eat you up, right? So that's a question you always need to be prepared for in products and markets. The next thing is the market size. Again, you know, this company that I was just describing, you know, that makes simulators to train orthopedic surgeons. We always get this question of how big is your market? So when we started this business, we had we weren't looking at selling it to all universities affiliated with hospitals, right? Because that's actually a fairly sizable market. So when we first started it, we got development dollars from one of the healthcare majors. And so we were actually just thinking of selling to them, right? So it was an OEM. So we were going to sell them. And when we were trying to raise money at that time, you know, people went and researched that OEM and said, well, they've only got 30 centers. How many machines can they possibly buy, right? And that sort of put us back a little bit. But later on, we had some issues at the OEM, and you know, we looked at the entire residential training market, right? Residential training for surgeons, and the market size was much higher. So sometimes it's just a question of thinking beyond your customer segment. So when in one of my later sessions, when I talk about business models, sometimes it's just looking at your customer segments and sort of asking the question, is this product just for this one market segment, or can it play in multiple segments? Now, the other thing, again, I would talk a little bit more when I talk about business models, are some famous terms that you may have already heard of, right? So first, the first thing is the total available market, right? Which, you'll go and research and you would say there are 100 players, they will buy 100 products, and therefore I can sell 10,000 units every month, right? It's what's called the total available market, sorry, right? But you find that as a startup, you possibly can't play in those markets, right? Because this market may be geographically the entire world, right? So you sort of break it down and say, what is my serviceable addressable market, right? So which is a market you can potentially service, right? And then the next question is, out of the serviceable addressable market, how many of that can you actually capture? Okay. Now, this is the way, all the big consulting firms will tell you to build your market size. And whenever you do a pitch, you need one of those, right? Because you always need to tell investors that, the market's actually huge. The danger, however, is if you build your financial model on that basis, I will dismiss it from day one. Because when you sort of say, I will have 10,000 customers by year 5, the question is, how many customers will you have year 1? How many customers will you have in year 2? Right? And if you say, if you're going to have 10,000 customers by year 5, remember, conversion rates are extremely low, right? So if you're going to have 10,000 customers by year 5, how many people should you have met? Probably at least 10 times that, right? Which is 1 lakh customers. Now, what is the kind of human resource, marketing spend, business development spend that you need to get there? And if you don't have the money to be able to get there, then, assuming that you will have 10,000 customers by year 5 is a non-starter. So while you might do this assessment about total available market, serviceable addressable market, and those are important because whenever an angel invests in you, they're also looking at exits, right? And especially in some of the healthcare space, we just did a healthcare investment in India, out of Delhi, and they have, I'm trying to remember now, they have a treatment which is unique, and it would make certain diseases a lot more manageable. Okay, I'm just missing the details on it, and when they pitched to us, they were very clear, right? They said the market for this is huge, but we don't have the marketing wherewithal to reach that market. So we are probably going to develop it to a point, and then we're going to sell it to a pharmaceutical company, right? So this is the same story that the other company that I just described, the company that's developing a treatment that kills the membranes of viruses. They basically said, look, we are an intellectual property business. We don't have the distribution spread of the big pharmaceutical companies. So we will probably develop it. Once we've done stage 1 FDA approvals, we will probably sell it. And then we would develop new products using the same platform. So knowing the market size gives you an idea of the potential exit, all right? But it doesn't mean that you as a company can reach it, right? So you need to be careful when you pitch and say the market's really huge and I'm going to be whatever, $1 billion company by year 5. It's not always believable, right? So you need to pitch that bit right. Next slide, Kapil. Okay, this is a problem that I have seen as well. A company, whether you have a in-house tech team. I've seen less of these issues with our Indian investments because India as a place is a tech-heavy space, so often you are able to hire enough tech people into the team. But it's a problem I've seen in Singapore because it's very expensive to get tech people. So a lot of development is outsourced, and it's outsourced into places like Ukraine, the Philippines, Vietnam, and all that kind of stuff. Now, the issue with this of not having the tech team within is the control over the product. Is there really the control over the quality of the development, especially if the founder who sits in Singapore or sits somewhere else don't really meet the tech team often enough. So our preference, and we've sort of learned from some of our mistakes, is to look and see if the tech team is within the is there, right? Is part of the company. So as I was telling earlier, whenever we look at founders, and if the founders don't have a tech background and it's a tech solution, we often look at who the CTO is. But of course, here, when I'm talking about the in-house tech team, I'm talking beyond the CTO, right? So making sure that the company is responsive from that aspect. And it's a big deal because many of our best investments in Keiretsu Chennai have actually been deep tech companies. So we're always looking to see that the technological evolution and improvement of the products is something that the team can carry. Next one, a big question that will come up. You should look at your product, and the question is it scalable? Can this really be big? Or is this going to be... See, you don't need to build a huge business to be successful, right? I mean, why is our Kirana store next to us a successful business and the guy there is happy just selling whatever that he is selling to his customers who live within a kilometer from where he is, right? Even that's a successful business. It's just not a scalable business, right? So, and that's not sexy. That's often a one-person show, one person's investments, and that's it, right? So when we look at angel investments, I mean, people are generally looking at really scalable stuff, right? Because otherwise, it should be a one-man show. Why should you go get capital from an external person, right? So a question that you often have to deal with is whether the solution is scalable. Now, when you link it to tech, you have a whole bunch of issues, right? Scalable in technology means the response time of your solution, the infrastructure that you need to carry, which is basically capacity, and the issue of architectural bottlenecks, right? Whether if you suddenly scale, will the system work or will it all collapse, right? So when we talk about scalability, you need to think of scalability both from a technology point of view and scalability, therefore, from a revenue point of view, right? People generally sort of say non-scalable businesses or a business that would get stuck at a particular point in time is not really investable. Right. Next question is, what are your acquisition channels? And when we come to, I think, session 3 or session 4, when we talk about business models, I would talk a lot about your channel. And one of the biggest issues is, how does somebody become aware of you, right? So looking at it from the other perspective, how do you acquire your customers, right? And you acquire your customers through channel decisions. That means how you allow people to find out about you. There needs to be some way that people are able to discover you. So you need to look at your product and solution and ask questions around, how do people know about you? Are you going to go knock every door? Are people going to find out about you by search engine optimization? How are they going to find out about you? So there are a lot of questions there that you need to have thought of, looking at your product and answering the question on how you are going to acquire channels, right? And the next very important question is, have you got product market fit? Okay, I want to spend a bit of time on fit. So next slide, Kapil. So when we talk about fit, and I will come back to this when I talk about business models, is you can talk about fits at 3 levels, okay? There is a problem, right? So let me take a problem, right? One of the problems, and because I've been associated with a couple of agriculture companies, right? One of the problems is, oh, the yield is always low. The yield is going down. Crops are not responding to fertilizers because they have over-fertilized over the years. So there's a problem, right? And the solution is to use biologics, right? To use solutions that improve the soil conditions into a more natural level, and therefore plants respond naturally, and therefore the yield can go up, okay? So you have a solution, and that is solving a problem, but it's on paper, right? Or when you say on paper, it's not just on paper. Often technology solutions are in a lab, right? So we have a couple of agri-tech investments. Great solutions will reduce cost of moving fertilizers, will reduce the use of fertilizers, so that you're not destroying the soil. Fantastic solutions, but they're all in the lab. The second question is, does the market really want this solution? Right? That's what we mean by product market fit. So at this stage, I'm not even talking about business model fit, right? And the reason is, angel investors are usually happy to come in when you have proof of concept, when you have a product market fit, and they're happy to fund you to experiment if you have a business model fit, right? So they expect you to have a product, right? So what do we mean by whether you have a product market fit? It means that somebody is actually interested in buying that product, even if as a pilot, right? Then you have proof of concept. So generally, angel investors invest at that stage, right? And they're happy to give you some leeway to test if there is a business model fit. Means that somebody is not just buying to do a pilot, but they keep coming back, right? And we have found that in certain technology areas, this takes an extremely long time. And some areas, and agri-tech is one of which, where there is so much vested interest, it is extremely, extremely difficult, right? So, the thing about investing is we have successes, but we also have failures. And sometimes we learn from our failures that some areas are a lot more difficult, right? Even though the solution is perfect, you've got product market fit, it often doesn't translate into a business model fit because there are all kinds of vested interests that prevents you from getting there, right? So next slide. Okay, I'll talk about value proposition a bit more the next time. The next slide. Okay, this is hard to see, but when we get to our business model session, I will talk about the value proposition canvas. But for now, let me just show you the next slide. Yeah. So the business model canvas will ask you to analyze and look at your product or service from these perspectives. First, you have to profile your customers. What is the job they are doing? What are the pains and what are the gains that they're looking for, right? Then you describe your product or service. What is the pain relief that your product or service is giving? What is the gain creators that your product or service is creating? And you've got to match that with the customer profile, right? And there are some tools that some of these books and websites will give you. And I would talk a little bit more about it, but this is where you need to look for a fit. And this is the fit that you're looking for, right? Which I would cover in a little bit more detail, but because product market fit is such an important thing, I just wanted to explain a little bit more about it. Next slide, Kapil. Okay. So when do you have a fit? You have a fit when customers get excited about your value proposition, right? And again, I would touch on this. Your customers are judge, jury, and executioners of your value proposition. So you really need to develop a product. You really need to understand your customer, your potential customer, and ask these difficult questions. Are you really addressing their job, right? Does it really alleviate their extreme pains, right? Little bit, they're not interested, small cuts, they're not interested, right? But a heart treatment, they're interested, right? Are you creating the gains that they're really looking for, right? So it's really understanding what your customers want. And this is like super important. Next slide. Okay. So the other questions that are important, look at your product. Do you measure your unit economics? What do we mean by unit economics, right? What does it cost to make that product or to provide that service in a total sense, right? Not just bill of material, but also other costs, selling costs. So you really need to understand your unit economics, right? And the reason investors ask this question is it profitable, right? So one of the things that startups often need to deal with is your unit of economics is often very high, and therefore your margin's very low, right? So go back to the company I talked about, right, which makes simulators to train orthopedic surgeons. When we make one unit, right, our hardware comes from the Swiss company, right? There is only so much, and the cost of the hardware is therefore almost non-negotiable, right? You can imagine Swiss cost of it, right? But we know that once we are sort of selling 100 units a year, I would do a licensing arrangement with a Swiss unit, right? And manufacture it in Taiwan. And the cost immediately comes down. And why is this important, right? When we talk to investors, right, as we are talking to angel investors vis-a-vis institutional investors will blanket tell me, for your technology, 50% margin doesn't fly. They're looking for 70, 75%, 80% margins. And we can't do it with just hardware. So the question is, how do you then evolve your business model and have what's called an asset management element, right? In which case, every time we add new cases, there's literally no cost because it's all software, and the margins keep going up, right? So you need to measure your unit economics because it's something that investors always ask about, right? Especially institutional investors, right? As I said, angel investors often make investments at a time to let you test out your business model, right? So they may not push you hard on this, but they do want to have a sense that the margins can actually improve, right? Because you need that sort of margins to be able to market and distribute your product. And once you're making things, are you tracking your KPIs? I mean, how is your financial performance, your revenue performance, and are you managing cash flows, right? I had an investor, he was white, and he used to tell me that he used to describe the best company that he had. And he said that the best company was also his biggest headache because the founder will come to him the day before the money runs out and say he needs more money, right? So I asked him, why do you invest in this company? And he said, but the technology solution is brilliant. No one else has it, right? And this sort of talks about, what kind of founding team you have, right? So when you rely on one person who is a great technologist, but may not be sound at running a business, right? Which is why you kind of need a really balanced team because there are things like cash flow that needs to be managed, right? We never think about things like that, right? Right, you think about the technology, you think about, often you can say sarcastically, perfecting the mousetrap. But no point perfecting the mousetrap if the market doesn't buy it and gives you cash for it, right? So you need to strike a balance of getting to a perfect product, but at the same time optimizing cash flow so that you can survive. Next slide, Kapil. Okay. Legal structures also important. I had a company. They are kind of successful in Chennai. They came to me because they wanted to expand in Southeast Asia. And then they said they will set up a company in Singapore, but they were looking for money to be injected into the Singapore entity. And they said, oh, they will let the Singapore entity do all the sales in this part of the world. And of course, many of the investors that they talked to balked at it. They said, well, all your intellectual property, all your development is sitting in the company in India. And you're asking me to put money into an entity in Singapore over which, I don't even know I have a long-term arrangement, right? So why should I take such a risk, right? So, and I've often had some of my startups ask the question, right? They're all companies formed in Chennai, but they're expanding. They're now doing work in other parts of the world, and they've often come to me and said, oh, should I set up a Singapore entity so that we can raise angel investors who are worried about India can invest through the Singapore entity? And that has issues as well. What is the relationship then between the Singapore entity and the operating entity in Chennai? So investors do look at them. They want to know that they actually have legal rights. Their investments are actually where they are supposed to be. There are some investors who prefer to inject all the money through an offshore entity before channeling it into India. But I think that's less and less. A lot of Indian companies are able to raise funds in India, and many of the companies we have invested in through Keiretsu Chennai are all Indian companies. Not that they have not formed foreign companies, but they've formed foreign companies as subsidiaries of the Indian entity, right? So some of the IIT companies have gone to the US, have gone to Europe. So when they started getting customers in those places, then they formed subsidiaries offshore, right? And the investment is very clear. And today they're raising money. They're also raising money from investors outside India, but it all moves into that top holding company, which holds the entire operations, right? So that's the thing about legal structures, right? Sometimes you think, oh, let me create a structure because, make it easier for investors, but investors look at ownership, and the ownership is important. We'll talk a lot more when it comes to fundraising, how much of the equity you're planning to give away. If in your first fundraise, you're giving up more than 25%, people are going to get worried, right? Because raising money for a startup is many levels, right? So in the next session, we talk about, stages of funding, right? So the first money that you take is typically called the seed stage, right? Someone is seeding you. They're helping you test your business model and build your business. So generally, we've looked at dilutions of around 20% and not more, right? Sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on what is the valuations that you are able to justify based on what you have developed. Because at the next round, you might give up another 25%, right? So the thing is, we often don't want to see founders at less than 50% before they're at Series C, Series B, or Series C, right? And I would talk about what Series A, B, C means when I talk about it. You will also see a little bit of that in the Seed Stars document that I've asked TiE to share with you all, right? So it is an important question on how much equity you're planning to give away, right? So related to that is your fundraising strategy, how much you plan to raise, what is it for, who you plan to raise from. Is it angels? Is it institutional? All right. So the strategy is important. Where do you want to raise it? Do you want to raise it in the market that you're going into? So these are all important questions, right? And of course, finally, how does your pitch deck look and feel like, right? The look and feel is important for someone to really believe in you. Okay, next, I think I'm at the end of the session. Next slide, Kapil. Let me see. Yeah. Okay, so let me look at the questions. I don't think there are many questions in the chat box. My God, that's such a detailed question, how to calculate unit economics. I think I need to explain that in person. Okay, I'll pass that question. Other questions? Please expand on look and feel. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about look and feel, right? A lot of people want a PowerPoint that is kind of flashy. But the problem with PowerPoints is it's a bit like my presentation today. I can just put the point, but I can't talk through it, right? So whenever I do fundraising, we create two sets, we create several sets of documents. One document is a memorandum. So it tends to be words with a few pictures because that gives a few details. And a memorandum, for example, for the medical simulator business where I wrote the memorandum myself, it was about 17 pages, okay? Now, you often don't want to give such a full document to everybody. So you often do a teaser with, and you sort of hide some details in a teaser, which tends to be a 2-page document. Then you have a third document, which is often a PowerPoint slide. Because a lot of, and if you have videos to show how your product works, that's great. You want to put it in that PowerPoint slide. So the look and feel is, and the problem with PowerPoint slides, right? And I see a lot of pitch documents. If those PowerPoint slides are too crowded, I find that I can't read it. I can't understand it quickly. Everybody is impatient. They want to know what is the problem you're solving, how you're solving it, and why your solution is better than anybody else. And they want to understand it in 3 or 4 slides, right? So when we talk about look and feel, we are worried, what I worry about is what I call crowded slides. And actually just today, I got a slide stack on supposedly a company that is doing kind of well, because if I look at the customer traction, it seems impressive, but I look at the rest of the slides and I don't understand the value proposition. And I don't understand, not because it's not there, but when slides are too crowded, I don't have the time to read it, right? So again, we will talk a little bit more about look and feel when we get into the details, since this is just the first session leading up to it. I think that's the answer for now. Okay, a couple other questions have come up. What is the reason for not getting traction for your products? Not clear, either mixed responses or no responses. Okay. Why don't you get traction? They don't want to buy, right? Or maybe you're too expensive. And maybe they don't want to change from what they're already using, right? So your value proposition is not compelling enough for them to change, right? See, the nature of people is that people hate change, right? So if they're happy with the solution that they have, you need to offer something that's compelling enough for them to change, right? And sometimes getting the timing right is also a big deal, right? So for example, again, going back to my medical simulator business, what were people doing before there were simulators, right? We know that the pilot training has moved from, because airplanes are so expensive, they moved to simulators, right? Why can't we train surgeons through simulators, right? Because it's not an easy market, it's a bit of a niche market. Because people haven't done before, building traction in a place like this is very difficult, right? And actually, one of the things that is kind of helping us right now is the fear of COVID, right? Because if you don't do simulators, what do you use? You use dead bodies, right? And the fear with dead bodies today, what if it's a COVID spread? And the problem is dead bodies are becoming harder and harder to be ethically procured for the purpose of training surgeons, right? So things will evolve, right? So going back to Bill Cross' slide, sometimes timing is everything. Okay, Jawahar, I will get someone to unmute you
Yes.
later. Just take some of the, have you been unmuted, Jawahar?
Yes, I'm unmuted. Sir.
Okay, so ask your questions.
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm from Coimbatore. I'm into coir. I'm in the initial stages of setting up my coir factory. Sir, my first question is very basic. So why are angel investors not interested if the product is not new? For example, my line of business, coir, it has a huge market. I mean, even if it is not a new idea or a new product, still, the coir exports are huge and the market is huge. So why are angel investors not interested in investing in startups that are already existing? The idea is already there. So, I want to get your thoughts on this, sir.
Okay, so so what is angel investing, right? We sign checks, we sign small checks into a large number of companies. And why do we do it? Because we know that a third of what we invest, we won't get the money back. Now, a third of what we invest, we may get a return that is not much more than a bank return, right? Which is not attractive, right? I should put the money in the bank.
Okay.
Then the final third of my investments are the ones that would do extremely well. And therefore, overall on my portfolio, I will get probably a 30% IRR, okay? And the 30% IRR is based on a 40-year study in the United States, right? Okay. I don't think we have the kind of studies in India. So what do angel investors look for when they make an investment, right? If I put 10 lakhs today, can I get 1 crore back in 5 years, in 6 years? And that is the question. Okay. So some businesses that would be profitable, like the one that you're describing, is it going to scale 10x? Can I get 10 times my investment return? So sometimes the reluctance to invest is because of their portfolio distribution, right? They can't suddenly invest in something that doesn't give them a 10x potential, because they know that they're not going to make much on 2/3 of the money, right? So when they assess every investment, they're looking for a 10x return. Is there a 10x return, right? Because we know the reality that we won't get 10x on every investment. And we know that on some investments, I will actually lose money.
Okay.
Right? So that's often the challenge when it's an existing business, right? So where do you get the 10x investments, right? Okay. To be honest, we have learned as we've gone along, and we have found that, and to be honest, out of my 30 or 40 investments, some of them I'm not going to see money back. I've already had one exit at 30-something%, right? So I lost, 60%. So the investment, so you need to put yourself in the shoes of the investor, right? And that's why you got to understand why angel investors think the way they do. It's because they know the risk and probably experience the risk of losing money on their investments, right?
But
And all this hard-earned money, tax paid money.
so, but in the case of, say, in my example, the risk is very low and the returns are
Right.
like really high, because I'm seeing such a huge potential for, market and international market. But, so even then, say if I can prove to the angel investors that, yes, the idea is
Yeah.
already there and the market is there, if I can give 10x of returns,
Then why not, right? Yeah. So why not, right? So if you really have that kind of scale, of course, some of the questions that will come, is there an intellectual property protection? If your margins are so great, will competitors jump in, right? Some of the questions that I asked earlier, right? Are there barriers to entry? So you've got to answer that 18 questions that I've posed today. And actually, if you can answer them well, I don't see why you can't raise.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
And thank you, sir. You gave a fantastic explanation. So my other question is, you spoke about market size, right?
Yeah.
So, I think point number 4, can you prove the market need? And then point number 7, you spoke about, do you know your market size, right? So
Yes.
as a startup, what are the ways that I can find what my market is? Because do I have to hire a marketing agency to find who is going to buy my product? So how is this possible with less resources to do a market study?
Yeah, actually, most of the companies we've invested in, I suppose they're all smart IIT students. So they're able to find a lot of information on the web, right? So you look at comparable information. One of the companies, underwater ROV company out of IIT Madras, they've done a great study on the market size by looking at what is the market, right? So they build shallow water ROVs, right? So the first question is, what are they replacing? So they're replacing divers, okay? So they have studied where are divers deployed to look at fatigue in metals, in dams, in ports, in bridges, and they sort of sized those market and then multiplied it and applied it to across the world. Then they said, which are the countries we are operating in? Of course, they started in India. Now they moved to the Netherlands, and then they are looking at Saudi Arabia. So they sort of said, okay, the market is several billion, but we are in India, in the Netherlands, and therefore we'll expand to the European Union. We are in Saudi Arabia, so we'll expand in the Middle East. We're in Singapore, so we'll expand in Southeast Asia. Then they added, what is the size of the market on those? And then they sort of said, what is the realistic market share that they can get? Because some people will still want to use divers, and it takes time, okay? So you can actually do a fair amount of research on the net and build your market model, right? Okay. It's a bit of work, it's possible, but it's a bit of hard work.
Okay, sir. And one last question, sir. What is the difference between institutional investors and angel investors, sir?
Or angel investors are individuals, right? So they sign their own check. Okay. Institutional investors is funds, right? So funds often are not signing their own money, okay, right? Others have invested in the fund and they're allowing the investment managers, the fund managers, to make the investment decisions, right? So you have various categories of funds, even in India. There are angel funds, there are various categories. So if a fund invests in you, we say it's an institutional investment, right? Because it's an institution, it's not an individual.
Okay. Got you, sir. Thanks a lot, sir.
Okay, let me go back. Let me see if I have missed any question. Look and feel, not getting traction. Yeah, Jawahar, after that, is it possible to raise funding before a POC? Tough, right? I'll talk a little bit about stages of funding at the next session. The first stage of funding is always the founder himself. The second stage of funding is what we call the FFF, which actually stands for Founder, Friends, and Family. And jokingly, we say friends, family, and fools, because funding before POC is risky. Hi, Akila, I just saw you joined, right? So, so before POC is very difficult. Angel investors typically come in after POC to let you test the business model. But we know of angels who come in much later until you actually can show revenue traction. So it's a, you know, it's very individual to the angel investor. But before POC is tough, right? You really need to turn to the FFF, which, you know, can be friends, family, and fools. What are areas to be worked for service company to raise funds? Service companies have a tough time raising funds, is the short answer. For many of the reasons I talked about, your ability to scale, margins, unit economics, often reliance on a single designer. For all of those reasons, the honest truth is it's very, very difficult to raise outside capital for service companies. Will I get a recording of the session? Can you check with TiE? So I'll leave TiE to answer that. Ways and means of getting co-founders to complement the founders with some stake. How does it work? And the founding team is more than one person, couples. Often people find co-founders in many different ways. Many of the companies that Chennai has invested in is a bunch of students who study together, or sometimes students and professors coming together so that there's some complementary skill sets. So some of it is built through institutions. There are also accelerator events. There are a couple of accelerators around the world, you know, that often gets a group of people. I think one of the most successful accelerators I know is a company called Entrepreneur First. It started in London. Its second operations with Singapore. Now they have expanded to many other countries, and I know now they're going to fail. It's very, very difficult to expand such things because of the input that you can give entrepreneurs. So the way Entrepreneur First does it, it focuses on really high-end technology. So many of the people who come there tend to be masters, PhD guys. And then they let people interact with one another. And people whittle down the ideas, right? They say, oh, you know, my idea won't work. Then the question is, can I partner with somebody with whom I have a complementary skill sets, right? So there are institutional ways in which you can create this co-founder set. But the one that we have seen frequently is people coming out of institutions. So a group of students with professors, that sort of thing. Another question on recording, leave that to TiE. Do angel investors also decide based on the personality of founder? Yes, but it is a very, in my view, it's very dangerous. We have come across fraudsters as well. There was a company, fortunately, no one from Keiretsu Singapore or Keiretsu Chennai invested in that company. The founder was a strong personality. He was from, came out of America, but he came from one of the Balkan countries in Europe. And, you know, there were investments made through some of our members in the US and Canada, and all the money went to this. So sometimes when we look at personalities, it's, you know, and the problem for me personally is I'm a forensic accountant, you know, I'm just about to start work on a fraud that is 26,000 crores. And the problem whenever I come across some of these is the personality of the chief. So I worry when when there is a single strong personality. But I would say, the answer is very individual. Angels invest because they like or they don't like, right? So it's very difficult to really have a thing. But I personally worry if there's one single strong personality, because there are all kinds of risk associated with it. When do you classify a startup as a deep tech startup? Deep techs are, you have something unique. You either have codes, a formulation, where technology drives the solution, right? And so often it's technology that is not available elsewhere. And they have our products that's working very differently. So someone is saying, I have a POC prototype, but not enough funds to prove traction. What's our chance? Look, nobody said raising funds is easy, right? I have really struggled with my medical simulator business that I described, right? I mean, it's going to change the world, right? I'm going to train surgeons. They don't have to use dead bodies anymore. They don't have to use sawbones where they would waste the toolkits. And I struggle with the fundraising because I take care of the fundraising for that business, right? So, good luck. If you want to be an entrepreneur, welcome to the club. It's not easy. Okay, how do I report big barter strategic partnership revenues? To be honest, I need a lot more detail to answer that question. The problem with barters is measurement. How do you measure what you give up against what you get? Right? This is an accounting problem, but I think, it's breaking it down to the value, and you would need some justifier basis to answer that question, right? What is the value that you're getting? Great presentation. Can you show the first 3 points? Okay, I think TiE would share the slides so you would get it. And I would also encourage you to download the Seed Stars document, because that explains it a lot further than I could have. Can you speak more on acquisition channels? Can you just wait for the business model session? Because I would cover that. Why are angel investors not interested in investing partnerships firms? Very simple, it's the limited liability. As I described, 1/3 of my money I'm not going to see back, 1/3 I'll get middling returns. So we'd rather put it in a company because our liability is limited to what we invested. So that's why we prefer companies to partnerships, right? So it's a legal problem. Do we have any group website to find those student prof coming out of institutions? I mean, it's all hard work, right? Go knock the door. I think this is really a question of engaging with a lot of the entrepreneur hubs in many of these institutions. I think many of the Tamil Nadu institutions today have an entrepreneur program. One of the best is out of IIT Madras, but almost all the others. Some great institutions out of Coimbatore, PSG in particular, but I would say many of the institutions have entrepreneur cells, and therefore, if you want to do it, you really need to engage with them. Yeah, I don't think it's a website thing. I mean, yeah, we know we have a COVID situation. Some of it you may have no choice but to actually meet people. A shooting academy company with a team of international experts. Yeah, it's a services company, right? I'm not saying services company are unable to raise money. It's just that there is no 10x exit potential in services businesses, which is why it is just difficult. Okay, there's a Sania, she wants to be unmuted.
A great session. Thank you, sir. I was just curious about how to report my barters, because right now most of my income is coming. So we're a travel and lifestyle discovery platform, which basically uses video and AR to create safe and seamless, safe and sustainable discovery for travel and lifestyle products. Now, right now, while we're building, most of our cost of building is being deployed and being paid by our clients, our supply side. So it's like an Uber for travel and for lifestyle, which would be wellness, nutrition, in those spaces. Right now, our costs are being deployed by our service providers. So it's like the driver of Uber would pay for the technology and the video and AR building. It's a bit like that. And they're very clear accountable. So one of my clients would be the Taj Group or the Oberoi Group. And how I would actually deploy it would be, they would say, okay, you've got a pool of 20 lakhs. You go and film, do the VR, AR, and the technology, the data and AI technology. So I have cost in-house would cost me about 7 to 8 lakhs. But what they bring on the table would otherwise cost me about 25 lakhs to get the permissions, the hotels, the accommodation, the local travel, all the costs. So the costs are actually being deployed, but I don't know how to show it on my P&Ls.
Okay, look, I'm not going to answer the accounting question because I'm not, while I'm a chartered accountant, I'm not an Indian chartered accountant. My chartered is both Singapore and Australia, right?
Yeah,
so forget about the accounting for now. Why don't you
not the accounting, just value. That's what I meant.
So measure the value. If you say what they offer you, you would have had to spend 25 instead of 20. So you have a clear basis on which to measure the unit economics, and that's how you do it. Do it based on value, real value.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. It was a bit confusing for me. Thanks.
How to know what my founding team is the right size? Hard question to answer. It really depends on the type of company we're talking about, right? If you're in healthcare, you probably need a larger founding team because of the scientific talent that you may need in that group. Engineering, deep tech companies, insufficient engineers. Technology companies, maybe it's just the CEO and CTO, two is enough. So it really depends. Finding a co-founder is a major headache, absolutely, right? So which is why one of the slides talks about emotional intelligence. You know, how do you know you can relate? How do you know that you will stick together, especially in tough times, right? And all startups go through really tough times, right? Sometimes you don't have money, sometimes you don't have enough to pay your things, sometimes you have to downsize and rebuild it. So it is a headache, right? But welcome to the club. What do you want from the co-founder? You really want someone who compliments you. Oh, I think that someone is answering. Right, he said, does a successful company have the rights to pay back the angel investors at an earlier time and exit out of an angel investment? Yeah, I mean, if you build it into your investment agreement, you can do that. Some angels don't mind it. You know, if you buy them out soon enough and they've got the IRR, they might say, okay, you know, let me take the money and put it in another company. So it's a question of negotiating your transaction documents. Yep, agree, SVK. Too many founders will also be a problem. Right? People talk generally about 2 or 3 founders. And as I was describing this other company that is in the US that's developing a solution for viruses, some of their founders, because they are deep scientists, they're actually not part of the company, even though they work exclusively for that particular company in that respect. SVK, that's Maxwell Biosciences, if you're wondering what I'm talking about. what minimum returns expected by angels? I think I answered the question. We evaluate for a 10x return so that on a portfolio basis, we get at least 30, right? The thinking is very simple. If I take a risk-free and put it in deposit, I mean, when I first came to India over 10 years ago, the deposits were 8-9%. Now, of course, it's 4-5%. So basically, people are looking for a pretty good margin because of the risk associated with angel investments. Typically, as part of advising our members, we always tell them that what you can risk in angel investing is about 3 to 5% of your financial assets, because it is risky, right? What if all your investments fail, right? So it cannot be so much that it destroys your lifestyle, right? So 10x in how many years? Generally, we wait, 5 to 7 years is the key. Certainly in deep tech, which is a big focus of mine and ours, it takes longer because many of our deep tech investments, it takes 3, 4, even 5 years before they get to 7 crores, right? Which is $1 million US in turnover. So we're happy to wait, and really people don't look seriously at acquiring these companies until they are at the $1 million run rate. Why getting access to angel investors is not easy? What in life is easy? How confidential a new idea will be kept by angel investors? Look, it's a question of trust. If you hide too much, people can never understand what is it that you offer. And basically, angel investors are at the stage in their life, they're not interested in taking your investment and building the company, right? So they are more interested in their investment doing well, right? So once you have narrowed the pool, so it's a process. I mean, your initial pitch, you don't say a lot. When the investor is really serious and is about to sign the check, is when you may share a lot more, right? So you manage the investment, and we'll talk a little bit about it when we talk about fundraising strategies in the later sessions. Yep, good point, SVK. Identifying founders, you should have same wavelength approach, attitude, willingness to listen, meaningful arguments. That's true. We do fight, I mean, as I said, can you stick together when times really get tough is really the answer on whether you have got the right co-founders. Okay, I've gone through the chat bar. Any other questions? If the TiE people can help identify. There are no other hands up. And
no,
Jawahar got his hands up again.
Sir?
Jawahar?
Sir, yeah. Sir, just one question, sir. In the event of a loss, right? So is the personal property of the CEO or the company shareholders is touched by the angel investors? Say, you have to pay crores of money back to many suppliers, vendors, and things like that.
That's why. No. The answer is that's why you have a private limited company, right?
Okay.
So that liability is limited, right? It's a legal question, right? So look, I've had investments where I got a third of the money back, right? I don't go and sue the founder for the remainder. It's an investment, and I know, right? I already said I know that a third of my investments is not coming back, right? Okay. So that's why it's structured as a private limited company. There are no guarantees as such from the founders to the investors. And hopefully none of y'all do silly things like that, because that was one of the issues in the head of the Cafe Coffee Day guy jumping, because I know a little bit about the story. Some of it was the buyback clauses on the investments, right? So never have those buyback clauses. I mean, if people don't want to invest on that basis, then don't take that investment. And if you can't start a business, so be it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Right.
Good evening, Subra and SVK. This is Akila. Sorry, I joined a bit late. And thank you so much for doing this. Looking forward to rest of the sessions. I wasn't able to join earlier. but I can see that it has been a very, very interesting session. And hello, SVK. I didn't hear his voice. I've been listening only to
I'm sure he's on mute.
okay.
I've unmuted him.
Okay.
Hi, Akila. Hi.
Hi, SVK. Thank you so much, and thanks to Kiretsu for doing this for TiE. And for people who are not familiar with SVK and Subra, and including Shrikant, their colleague, they have been the pioneers in terms of putting the Pitch Fest of TiE Chennai together. So whatever Pitch Fest TiE Chennai continues to organize now was actually, the foundation was laid by the three of them. And once again, thanks to whatever you've been doing for us. So I thought I'll just say a hi and thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's nice to hear, Akila. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Akila.
we love to do what we can. So.
Especially in the investment space in the startup
Yeah,
space.
really.
Absolutely.
We
Absolutely.
live in,
Thank you.
And helping entrepreneurs, yes, we are there.
yeah, Akila, I saw you come in. I saw the notice, Akila just joined.
Yes. Yeah. It took some time for them to unmute me. So that's the reason I couldn't say hi immediately.
Okay, not an issue. Okay. We're at 1.5 hours. Are we taking any more questions?
No, I think it's more than 1.5 hours, Subra. It's already late for you now.
Yeah, it's just past 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's okay. I had dinner before the session.
Okay. I was about to say that maybe Subra was getting late for dinner, but okay.
I had dinner earlier. I knew that, this gets to 9 o'clock and then, I'll just have an apple and go to bed. So,
Okay.
I'm stuck in Singapore, as you may have heard.
For quite some time now.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So COVID has been challenging in that perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, look, you guys can consolidate your questions. I mean, there are 6 sessions and some of these questions, will also be addressed in greater depth in subsequent sessions when we talk about business models, fundraising, and all that kind of stuff. Valuations, transaction documents, right? So we will go back to some of these. This first session was really introductory, right? Just to get you thinking. Do you want to be an entrepreneur? Right? Do you want to be a crorepati, right? So do you want to be an entrepreneur? Okay, I'm done. So Kapil, Saurav, leave it to you all.
Sir.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
so-
guys can distribute the deck and the Seed Stars document. So I leave that to you because you guys have the link
Done.
to all.
Done, sir. We'll be sharing it. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
So, before we part, I have an announcement to make. So our next session is on the 12th of August, Wednesday. So the topic for the session is stages of funding and investor expectations in each of these stages. So thank you all for logging. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Good night, Subra. Bye. Thank you.
Night.